Do you guys remember a couple months ago when I talked about Dan Versus? Well, I mean, you could be new and not know that I did that, so here you go, here it is. In short, Dan Versus was really something special. It was an edgy animated sitcom with a nasty main character who we want to see win in the end. I honestly can't think of another show that did what Dan Versus did, especially not on the Hub. Yeah, for those who don't remember, the Hub was the home to, this show. Not only that, but the show found itself surrounded by other Hasbro properties like Family Game Night, Care Bears, Pound Puppies, and Strawberry Shortcake. Dan Versus was the only outlier here, and I think that that's what made it special. In a seemingly never-ending sea of fun for the whole family Hasbro products, we had Dan Versus. That's what really made it shine. However, contrary to popular belief, it was not all smooth sailing for our jerky protagonist and his childlike friend. No, if it was, they wouldn't be here. Welcome to Versus the Network 101, what happens when the network just stops caring. Even before Dan Versus got to the Hub, their network problems were already pretty high. The creators, who are named Chris Pearson and Dan Mandel, yes, the characters were named after the creators, but we can't dwell on that, so let's move forward. They kept pitching this around from network to network to network, and they all said no. Even Adult Swim, who is known for taking extreme risks on things like, say, Aqua Teen Hunger Force, Space Ghost Coast to Coast, or Super Jail, said no to Dan Versus. However, their diligence paid off because, as luck would have it, Cartoon Network had this giant executive shakeup, and the new executives actually wanted Dan Versus. Not for Adult Swim, but for Cartoon Network, which was okay, until it wasn't. They were trying to convince the creators to do things like age Dan down to make it more relatable with the kids, but of course that didn't really fly. Chris Pearson described the show's production at Cartoon Network as development hell, and luckily, they ended up getting out of there just in time. Thanks to them not signing over the show officially, they were able to keep the rights. And this was right around the time when CN Reels started showing up. Ooh boy. That means if Dan Versus did go on Cartoon Network as planned, it would have lasted maybe one season, and then would have been replaced by Survive This or The Other Siders. I don't want to live in that alternate timeline, I'm good here. They ended up getting picked up by this brand new network called The Hub, and they were the only ones there that were not a Hasbro property. Keep that in mind, that's gonna play in big later on. Once again, according to Chris Pearson, you're gonna be hearing that a few more times throughout the video, the network was surprisingly supportive of their show. Yeah, they were trying to get away with a lot of nasty stuff, the likes of which, say, Pound Puppies would never even attempt, but they were okay with that. There were a few rocky moments and times where they butted heads, but nothing too out of the ordinary. The two biggest examples I can think of are when the network told them to change the ending of Family Cruise to make it less, conclusive, I guess, and changing around the airing order, which surprisingly happens a whole lot. Baby Blues, Dave the Barbarian, and even SpongeBob SquarePants all have this happen. It's nothing unique, and it's nothing super damaging, but it is a little bit irksome because the creators clearly had a specific order in mind, which, for the record, was this. But on the whole, nothing too terrible happened to Dan. Until the end of Season 3, that is. The network decided to do Dan dirty. What did they do? They left it to rot, having it be stuck in eternal limbo. Not officially canceling it, but basically forcing everyone to get tired of asking when's the next episode, when are we going to be back in production, and move on with their lives. This is the network equivalent of ghosting someone on Tinder. You start up a conversation, things seem to be going okay, but then out of the blue, they're gone, never to be heard from again. Dan Versus met the exact same fate, and I think Curtis Armstrong, the actor who played Dan, describes it perfectly with his Facebook post that I will read for you right here. Christian Paredes, James Jones, and Larry Reaper, among others, have been kind enough to ask about Dan Versus, the animated series that I've been doing for the last few seasons on the Hub. It was created by Chris Pearson and Dan Mandel, and also starred Dave Foley and Paget Brewster, giving truly funny performances as Dan's best friend and wife respectively. Dan Versus actually won an Emmy this year for direction from Dan O'Neill, or could be Angel depending on how you pronounce it, and was among my favorite pastimes. It has been cancelled for the baffling and inexplicable reasons that shows like Dan Versus get cancelled. I can't really explain it because it's never been explained to me. Occasionally, I would ask about the status of the show and be told it wasn't cancelled. But when I would ask about specifics, there would be long, awkward pauses and then changes to other subjects, like the weather, or the possibility of a government shutdown. This was the previous government shutdown, which gives you an idea how long this has been going on. Finally, I had to just give up and move on with my life. This is actually not uncommon in my business. Things just sort of fade away with a noticeable absence of closure. You can't help dwelling on it for a time, but eventually, the whole thing just becomes sort of a fragrant memory. Some fragrances, of course, are sweeter than others. I'm happy to say that in the case of Dan Versus, they are, pretty much across the board, sweet. I loved everyone I worked with. The company was great, the network was supportive, and, of course, the fans were rabid and vocal in their enthusiasm. The checks cleared, it's out on DVD, and it was fun, and you can't really ask for more than that. As you can tell from here, the network basically gave up on the show and pretended that it didn't. No way, Dan Versus is still going on, but we're not gonna tell you when it's coming back or what's happening behind the scenes, so how about that President Obama, huh? I will disagree with one thing that Curtis Armstrong had in his post. There is one more thing you could ask for. Actual closure. It's not that hard. In a business that's as cold and calculating as show business, things do not happen spur of the moment out of the blue. There had to have been a motive, there had to have been a reason. And I have two theories as to what happened. My first theory is that this has something to do with the Discovery Family rebrand. For those who don't know, the hub ended up becoming Discovery Family. There you go, you're caught up to speed. In all seriousness, what actually happened was that sometime around 2013, Hasbro decided it didn't really want to do business with the hub anymore, at least not as much. So the Discovery Channel swooped in, bought a whole bunch of Hasbro stock, and then became majority owner in the network and rebranded it to Discovery Family. Now, Dan Versus was cancelled before this ever happened. That would lead some to think that these two are unrelated. However, these kinds of buyouts and mergers don't happen overnight. They also don't happen in the span of a month or two either. There are contract negotiations, terms and conditions, plans being worked out for what they want to do with their new acquisition. These things take a long, long time, and especially before they ever get announced to the public. When they finally make the announcement, they have a pretty solid foundation of what exactly is going on. It's possible that the Discovery Channel thought that Dan Versus didn't really fit its demographic. It's possible, but in my opinion, not super likely. Mostly because I have more stock in my second theory. This has something to do with Hasbro. Remember when I said that Dan Versus was basically the only hub show that wasn't in some way owned or funded by Hasbro? Yeah, to me, it seems like that's what did it in the end. Hasbro was not only a partner with the hub, they owned a sizable amount of stock, meaning that they were part owner. That's why you saw all of these shows based off of their intellectual properties, especially the ones that were having toy lines coming out. Dan Versus did not fit that. Therefore, Dan Versus wouldn't exactly be favored by the network, and definitely not by Hasbro. It could have been that the hub was starting to lose ratings and revenue, so they had to start cutting costs and cutting corners, and one of those had to be Dan Versus. If they removed a Hasbro show, Hasbro would have gotten upset and then could have packed up and left, taking their money with them. Or it could have been that Hasbro had a new idea for a show and the hub didn't have a time slot, so one of these shows had to go. Why not make it the only one that was not in any way tied to its corporate overlord? You see where I'm getting at here, right? Now, none of these are strictly confirmed. Like I said, they're all theories. Even Chris Pearson himself doesn't really know what happened. That's just what happens when the network does this to you. You don't even know that you're really canceled. You could be on an extended hiatus that lasts until the next decade, but you'll never stick around long enough to find out. You need a job. You need to provide for yourself or your family. Time to pack up and move on. That's what the crews of these shows have to do. Just like Dave the Barbarian, my favorite show of all time. That too was put in limbo and everyone had to give up and move on. It sucks for everyone involved, the fans, the crew, everyone. And the part that stings most is that you never find out why. At least when shows get outright canceled, they tend to know what happened. Maybe they got bad ratings, maybe they got poor reviews, maybe they were too expensive, maybe they couldn't launch a toy line. But with this, nothing. It's like punishing a child but not telling them what they did wrong. All they see is that they got hurt. But is there any hope for the future of Dan Versus, if it has a future at all? Well, actually there is. Apparently, from what I'm hearing, Dan Versus is getting shopped around to a bunch of streaming services like HBO Max in order to get a revival. This is because the hub never officially owned the rights to Dan Versus. That was the producer Dan Onel/Angel. That means they're free to do with it as they see fit, providing of course they get the adequate funding. And hopefully they do. We gotta let the people know that we want to see more Dan Versus. I am very against show revivals because more often than not they turn out to be, this. But for Dan Versus, I'm willing to make an exception because Dan Versus was cut down in its prime and they still have all the ideas that they had from back then. They weren't done yet, they had a lot more stories to tell. And I said this in the previous video, Dan Versus is one of those shows that has such a loose premise that you could basically go on forever. And if the revival does get picked up, we can see Dan go up against things like Liechtenstein, Spas, Flag Day, The Childhood Bully, Itchy Underwear, Mondo Owada, and the Southern Hemisphere. I don't think that they're gonna do those last couple though, but, you know, it's possible. I bet you're all wondering how I even know that this is happening. Well, for one, I'm part of the effort to get it back up and running. Not too long ago, the Dan Versus fandom got in contact with none other than Chris Pearson himself. Chris and the de facto leader of the fanbase ended up coming up with a plan to get Dan Versus revived. During the pitch, Chris has to make it absolutely clear that there's still a market for Dan Versus. And that's where folks like me come in. A bunch of YouTubers who were clearly fans of Dan Versus were contacted, myself included, and were asked to join this grand plan to publish Dan Versus related videos all around the time that this supposed reboot is gonna be pitched. I'll be honest, like I said, normally I'm not really big on cartoon revivals, but I'm also not a big fan of people trying to get them revived. Let's face it, change.org petitions aren't really gonna change anyone's minds. But when I heard that the big man himself was a part of this, I couldn't say no. And you know what? I implore you guys to not say no either. Doesn't matter if you guys are YouTube reviewers or whatever, you can still get involved. Start sharing the hashtag DanVersusRevival, or go onto the Dan Versus message boards that I've linked in the description and get involved in the community. I mean, why not? Chris himself is there, you can ask him a lot of questions. Just don't pester him, please. No one likes that. But is there a lesson to be learned from what happened to Dan Versus? Absolutely, although it's a little bit hard to apply. The network's the entity that decides whether your show lives or dies. It can snap its fingers and at a moment's notice, you could be packing up and heading off to Nickelodeon where shows and dreams go to die. So you won't really be able to decide whether your show gets to avoid the cancellation, but you can press the network for why it happened. You have a right to know. Was it something you did? Was it something that the show did? Was it something that happened with the viewership? Something. There had to have been a reason. And learning this reason can help you when you pitch a news show or when you help someone else work on their project. Knowledge is power after all. So if you ever pitch a show and get it picked up, beware. With no notice whatsoever, you too could have your show be ghosted by the network. Well folks, thanks for watching the video. What'd you think? What do you think of the situation that Dan Versus got itself into? And would you like to see Dan Versus come back? Comment below and let me know because I'm always excited to hear what you guys have to say. Now, I hope you're ready for more Versus the Network because as the videos go on, the treatment gets worse and worse and worse. Stay tuned, folks. Things are about to get rocky and crazy. And you can only find out how by watching the next 3 videos coming in the next 3 weeks. Wow, shocker. The 90s were home to a lot of hits, weren't they? Let's see, there was SpongeBob, Rugrats, the Pokemon anime, and all of these. But one of the very biggest hits to come out during this time was Tiny Toon Adventures. Tom Ruegger and Steven Spielberg teamed up to create a show about the new generation of Looney Tunes, which are obviously called the Tiny Toons. There were a lot of factors that went into Tiny Toons' success. The animation, the characters, the voice acting, but especially, above all else, the writing. Tiny Toons came out at a time where cartoons were not necessarily the best. Keep in mind, this is the point in animation history where the real Ghostbusters was heralded as the greatest thing ever because it didn't treat kids like idiots. The one show got this recognition. And before you say anything else, yes, I'm sure there were others around this time as well, for example, Ralph Bakshi's Mighty Mouse cartoon. But I'm using that as a singular example, okay? We're good? We're clear? Fine. Once Tiny Toons wrapped up, it only made sense for the crew to stay together and make a new show. But not just a new show that was bigger, better, and far more outrageous. This is where Animaniacs came in, and this blew Tiny Toons out of the water in terms of popularity and arguably quality. There was no real set story to Animaniacs, rather we focused on various different casts of colorful characters, like the Warner siblings going around to different pop culture icons or historical entities and causing mayhem, or just running around the Warner lot like the theme song says. Rita and Runt, a stray cat and dog who love to sing Broadway-style show tunes and are hoping to find a home. The Goodfeathers, who are basically the Goodfellas but birds. And there was also Mindy and Buttons. Their main joke was that their cartoons were always terrible and unfunny. Of course, there were a ton of other groups of characters, but we don't have time to focus on each and every one of them today. That's for someday in the future, but right now we're talking about perhaps the most popular segment in all of Animaniacs, Pinky and the Brain. The story of two lab mice, one a complete idiot and one a total maniacal genius, trying to
take over the world.
Right away, people fell in love with these two. Pinky's idiocy but good intentions combined with Brain's desire for power and total cynicism made these guys something special. They were more than just the Home Alone robber stereotype where one of them was the idiot and one of them was the genius and that was about it. Very early on, the two of them became three-dimensional, well-fleshed-out characters. And the more that happened, the more people liked them. And of course, the more people liked them, the more Warner Brothers executives saw dollar signs in their eyes. With the explosive success of Animaniacs, it only made sense to give one of the casts their own show, and it may as well be the second most popular one, Pinky and the Brain. You can't really give the Warners their own spin-off because Animaniacs is basically their show already. It's like giving Phineas from Phineas and Ferb his own spin-off but calling it just Phineas. I can see it now, lasting 7 episodes, and that's it. Now, don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying the spin-off was bad by any means. On the contrary, the spin-off was actually better than the Pinky and the Brain segments in Animaniacs. They didn't merely take the concepts they had for the 7-minute shorts back on the old show and stretch them out, like say Ren and Stimpy did in Ren and Stimpy Adult Party Cartoon. Instead, this motivated them to tell bigger, grander, more complex stories, and definitely pushing the envelope when it comes to humor. No, the subject of today's video is what happened behind the scenes, and it all started with when Pinky and the Brain got picked up as its own show. It's abundantly clear that the only reason that Pinky and the Brain got their spin-off was because the network wanted more revenue and more viewership. They didn't take time to understand why Pinky and the Brain was popular, they just saw it was popular and wanted more of it. And that leads us to Versus the Network Lesson 102, what happens when the network doesn't understand your show? Throughout its entire run, Pinky and the Brain's spin-off show was at odds with the network. It just wouldn't stop, and it became clear why. The network did not understand why Pinky and the Brain was as big of a hit as it was. Nor did it understand the characters of Pinky and Brain, but we'll get to that soon. Let me ask you this question. When you watch the Roadrunner and Coyote shorts, who here roots for the Coyote? I'm raising my hand, take my word for it, and I assume half of you out there are too. That's because the Roadrunner is not the main character in those shorts. That's the Coyote. It was always said that whenever one of those cartoons was put into production, the main goal was to make people sympathize with the Coyote. We wanted him to win. We wanted him to catch that stupid Roadrunner. He never manages to do it, of course, but that doesn't mean we don't come back again and again hoping that this time it's gonna be different. And that's exactly what Pinky and the Brain was. They are technically two coyotes, and the world is their Roadrunner. Week after week, they constantly come up with these brand new ideas to take over the world, and they get exceedingly more ridiculous and absurd. But through it all, they remain dedicated and determined, never letting anything stop them, until Pinky screws it up or Brain has an oversight. Whenever you come into a new episode, you're hoping, okay, this could be the one. This could be the one where Brain succeeds and finally gets what he wants. He'll be happy this time. But it never really happens. Or when it does happen, it gets undone. For some reason, the network, the very people that ran the show, didn't understand this. They thought that having a show about two essentially villainous people, or I guess in this case, lab mice, was completely unfounded. There's no way that a show like that could possibly work. Even though it already did. But ignoring that, there's no way it could work. There were constant pushes to make the characters more sympathetic or nice or anything like that. not realizing that that's kind of already what they were. Look at Pinky here. There is no way you could call him evil. He basically goes along with whatever Brain says because, well, what else is he gonna do on a Thursday night? And Brain, surprisingly, has some good motivation. Don't get me wrong, it probably wouldn't be a good thing if he took over the world, especially because lab mice don't really have long lifespans, but he does it because he wants to improve on humanity's errors. In his mind, he's got the solutions that it takes to make the world a great place full of unity, harmony, and progress. If Warner Brothers wanted these characters to be deeper or more sympathetic or kinder in some way, all they had to do was turn on the TV and watch an episode. They'll see exactly what they wanted. But no, we had to get Pinky and the Brain being wonderful, relatable, happy-go-lucky, smiley characters all the time. But that wasn't enough. Apparently, Pinky and the Brain were not interesting enough on their own. They needed to have sidekicks, and silly neighbors, and those crazy little kooks that they always have to compete against to take over the world. Yeah, this doesn't sound like Pinky and the Brain, does it? It sounds like network jargon. This is probably where the likes of Snowball come in. I never really liked Snowball all too much because I kind of felt that he was just Brain but weaker, which I guess is exactly what the network wanted. Although, now that I think about it, it seems like Snowball was what the network thought that Brain was, but you know, we covered that already. And I'm sure we all know about the famous middle finger that the creators of Pinky and the Brain gave to the network, Pinky and the Brain and Larry, where one day, out of nowhere, some lab mouse named Larry shows up and bam, he's part of their trio. Except there's not supposed to be a trio. In fact, there's not even supposed to be a Larry. It's just Pinky and the Brain, just yin and yang. This was, very unsubtly, a message to the network saying that Pinky and the Brain works because it's Pinky and the Brain. No Larry, no Snowball, no Purple and Brown, no Chester A. Arthur, just Pinky and the Brain. The network got the message and then backed off for about 10 minutes. Apparently, it just got worse and worse to the point where one of the head writers, Peter Hastings, had to leave the company entirely. And if you want to see just how badly Pinky and the Brain was treated by the network, all you have to do is look at Peter Hastings' last episode, You'll Never Eat Food Pellets in This Town Again, which for personal reasons is my favorite episode of the entire show. Again, I don't think it's the best. It's just personally my favorite because of what we're about to discuss. Tell me if this sounds familiar. Pinky and the Brain are trying to do their show as scheduled. They have ideas, they have a plan, and they want to go through with it. But the network cuts in saying that they know how to save the show from what? Honestly, nothing, but they're gonna save it anyways. They retool Pinky and the Brain to the point where it emulates all the other crap that's on TV and has none of the original spark or charm. Then they set out to do their own thing while constantly having the shadow of the network loom over their shoulders. I wonder if this is based off of anything that happened in real life. I have no idea. And somehow, despite how overtly clear this episode was, how attached it was to real life situations, the network not only let this air without any edits, but they didn't pick up on it. They thought it was simply another Pinky and the Brain episode. No matter how many times the episode would basically scream, "Hey, this is your fault, network. Don't mess with us. We already lost one of our head writers. Don't make us lose any more people. We can't afford that." As I'm sure we can all gather, those arguments fell on deaf ears. You know why? Turns out either Peter Hastings knew something that the audience didn't, or he was just some kind of oracle or prophet. Because as it turns out, the episode You'll Never Eat Food Pellets in This Town Again came true in real life. They took Pinky and the Brain out of the lab and into a contemporary setting so it would blend in with all the other shows on at the time. That, and it would give them a colorful side character to bounce off of in each and every episode. In fact, so much so that it would take their focus away from trying to take over the world, and more trying to adapt to their environment and interacting with the sad side character. Already, there are alarm bells going off everywhere. It doesn't have to be all bad though. This could work. Maybe, just maybe, if Pinky and the Brain were given, say, an intelligent, or funny, or well-written side character, this show could be a success. Oh no, it's Elmira Duff, the least popular of all the Tiny Toons characters, and for some reason, a character that the network would just not let go. She even appeared in an Animaniacs episode with the Warners. And yeah, we were all so happy to see. I can't even fake it. I can't even fake it. After all this time, after all the letters from fans, don't you think that the network would realize that people don't like Elmira? I guess not, because we got Pinky, Elmira, and the Brain. Personally, I don't think it's quite as bad as everyone says. There are a couple jokes that make me laugh, but yeah, this was the worst possible direction they could have gone. The worst part about it all is that Pinky and the Brain got their show completely removed. No more new episodes, no more anything. This was going to be their new and only show, and the networks constantly advertised it as Pinky and the Brain, but with Elmira thrown in. But that's not what it was. If anything, Elmira was the lead and Pinky and the Brain were her sidekicks. So it was like that episode of Tiny Toons, Grandma's Dead, but with Pinky and the Brain thrown in every so often. Speaking of that episode, apparently that was a backdoor pilot to see if Elmira could have a series of her own. Yeah, I wonder why it didn't take off. Maybe it's because she's extremely annoying and doesn't have any good interactions with any of the characters? I wonder. Okay, maybe she has some good interactions with Montana Max, especially later on, but that's one character. Just one. She does not have any chemistry with Pinky and the Brain. Zero. If you replaced her with some screeching troll monster or a banshee of some kind, the show would be no different. And sad to say, the network won in the end. And that's because, really, the network always wins. The network controls the fate of every show it has. At any given time, you could be deemed irrelevant and you're gone. That's what happened to Pinky and the Brain, solely because the network did not know what made Pinky and the Brain so popular. Instead of listening to the fans or the creative consultants, they felt that through the power of magic chicken bones, they could find this mysterious problem with the show that nobody else had commented on, and then save it from whatever this problem was. So to any show creators out there, when you're gonna pitch a show, whether it be to a streaming service or a TV network or whatever, make sure they get what's gonna make it popular. Make sure that they're on the same page as you. Otherwise, your beloved intellectual property is gonna go the same way as Pinky and the Brain. Beloved by everyone, except the people who had the choice as to whether it lived or died. Well, folks, thanks for watching the video. What do you think of Pinky and the Brain? What did you learn from today's Versus the Network lesson? Comment below and let me know, because I'm always excited to hear what you guys have to say. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Well, I bet all of you knew this one was gonna come up. Nickelodeon has been heralded as one of the absolute worst place for creative minds for I don't even know how long now. These allegations have been going on for years. It seems like with show after show after show after show after show, they do not learn their lesson. They give a series 1, maybe 2 seasons, and then bam, gone forever, not even reruns. And I think we all know why that is, and we'll get into that very shortly. But right now, I'm gonna walk you through Versus the Network 103, what happens when the network is too scared to try anything new. So think about it. You're an up-and-coming show creator, or maybe you're a veteran creator. You have all these new ideas you want to try out, and you pick your favorite one. You spend about a year, maybe 2 years designing the characters, mapping the world out, and coming up with premises for episodes. You have everything all set and ready to go. You go to Nickelodeon, you pitch your idea, and they say, "That's a great idea! Let's do it! Let's pick up your show!" And when it's in production, you notice that something's kinda wrong. Either they're not really super into your show and not giving it the time of day, or maybe they're too overbearing and they're trying to meddle like what happened with Pinky and the Brain. You shrug it off thinking, hey, this is probably how the network does it, I've never been here before. But then when your show finally manages to come out, that's where everything falls apart. Your show is nowhere to be found in the network schedule. You're aired at 3 o'clock in the morning on Wednesdays so that no one can see it. And then, bam, they move your show to Nicktoons Network where the last couple episodes can get on the air, and then you're gone. Forever. That's it. You lost your job, the show is canceled, time to move on with your life. And if you dare say anything about it, you're out on the streets. You never get to work in this industry again. There are powerful people that work at Nickelodeon, so don't you dare cross them. This is what happens every single time, unless some magical miracle happens. And we all know why that's the case. 2 words that are kind of 4, SpongeBob SquarePants. Don't get me wrong, seasons 1 through 3 and some of 4 and 5, and also bits and pieces of the newer stuff, are great. But that does not excuse what the network has done. They have relied on SpongeBob ever since it first came out. This has been the staple of their network, taking over more and more of the airspace as the years have gone by. SpongeBob is a multi-billion-dollar industry in and of itself. It generates a constant, never-ending flow of revenue from all those people out there. And really, does that come as any surprise? SpongeBob SquarePants is one of the most iconic characters in all of entertainment. He's up there with Bugs Bunny, Homer Simpson, Mickey Mouse, and whoever this guy is. Really? The whole network can basically be SpongeBob and SpongeBob alone? And they'd be perfectly sustainable. A lot of children can't get enough of that wonderful sponge. And as a result, all the parents who have these kids want to buy them all kinds of SpongeBob merchandise. This could be literally anything with SpongeBob's face slapped on it. Shirts, lawn chairs, rectal thermometers. If it has SpongeBob on it, it's gonna sell like crazy. The only downside with this plan is that it would look really bad for investors and advertisers. See, SpongeBob alone would be able to keep the network up and running, but it would not give them a good image. They have to have other shows around the sponge to make it look like they're more than just that. But in actuality, they're only there as placeholders. And once the placeholders have outlived their usefulness, they're gone and replaced with something else. It's a never-ending revolving door, and that's because they're not meant to be shows, they're meant to be filler. Nothing more, nothing less. If the show happens to be of quality, oh well. If it doesn't, oh well. We can see this with how Nickelodeon has treated a lot of their Nicktoons, and there are so many to go through, so I'm not going to go through them all. I'm only going to talk about the most interesting ones. So let's start off with an early one. At the same time that Rocko's Modern Life and Ren and Stimpy were dealing with censorship issues, Hey Arnold seemed to be doing rather well, delving into serious issues and complex themes, all with little to no interference from Nickelodeon. Until the end. If you know Hey Arnold, you know this story. Towards the end of the series, Arnold started finding out more about where his parents were, especially in this episode called The Journal, where he realized, hey, my parents are still alive and they're still out there somewhere. Maybe I can find them. Maybe this map has something to do with it. Clearly not indicating that there's gonna be some big grand finale. The crew of Hey Arnold wanted to finish the series off with a bang, a theatrically released movie called Hey Arnold, The Jungle Movie. It was gonna cap off the entire series, finishing up all the arcs and solving the many mysteries that the journal brought up. In the meantime, they were also working on this smaller scale TV movie, Arnold Saves the Neighborhood. Nickelodeon, however, had other plans. They decided to have them switch the release formats of these two movies. So Arnold Saves the Neighborhood would end up becoming Hey Arnold, the Movie. And then maybe the Jungle Movie would be in theaters, maybe on TV, and we'll let you know later. And wouldn't you know it, Hey Arnold, the Movie bombed. People didn't like it, critics didn't like it, even I myself, a Hey Arnold fan, I didn't like it. It was basically just an episode of the TV show. That's it. Just a little bit longer. What's the point of paying money to see that when you can see it at home for free on TV? Then Nickelodeon said, oops, that didn't do well. Okay, series over, the end. And that's it. Hey Arnold got left off on a cliffhanger because Nickelodeon got greedy and wanted to get some extra money out of those Hey Arnold fans rather than have artistic integrity. But that's not the only time the network unceremoniously cut off the last episode of the show. Another tale as old as time itself, or at least as old as the 90s, the Angry Beavers finale. Long story short, because once again, I'm sure you've all heard this one before, the Beavers kind of went nuts in their last episode called Bye Bye Beavers, which was all about the show being cancelled, and then it's just kind of insane. Look up the audio if you want, it's a real trip. Even though the episode was entirely recorded, Nickelodeon refused to let that thing air. You know why? Because they wanted children to keep tuning into the network hoping that maybe, just maybe, there was a new episode of the Angry Beavers on its way. But of course, nope. Show's over, but the fans don't have to know that. Let's keep dangling that carrot in front of them, huh? It'll get us some extra revenue, and let's face it, we need it. SpongeBob only brought in a measly $4 billion this year. Oh, we're gonna starve! My Life as a Teenage Robot was a solid show that was quickly gaining a strong fan base. However, it seems like Nickelodeon either didn't understand that, or didn't want it, because they kept shunting it around from time slot to time slot to time slot, oftentimes without even warning people. Not helping was that the second season took forever to air. The thing is, though, is that it wasn't a breakout show quite yet. And it could have easily been. If they didn't do all of this nonsense, this could have been something like, say, SpongeBob or Rugrats. Let's face it, whether you like the show or not, you gotta admit, those who love it really love it, and they are very, very dedicated. And then, of course, when the last season was getting ready to air, it got cut off halfway through, and then years later the rest of it was aired on Nicktoons Network, which not everybody gets. Great job, Nickelodeon, you really know how to make a great series catch on. No, you don't. Chalk Zone got an almost identical treatment, albeit without the super devoted fan base. They waited 2 years to air the series, and then kept putting it around from time slot to time slot to time slot. Some of the new episodes even aired unadvertised at 3 a.m. I mean, really, whether you like the show or not, who wants to watch Chalk Zone at 3 in the morning?
Oh boy, 3 a.m.
Cat Dog didn't get screwed over until the very end. After a TV movie, there was a 4th season produced, but people had to wait a long, long time for it to come out. How long? 5 years. Yes, Cat Dog Season 5 just aired unceremoniously 5 years later, unadvertised, unprompted, and largely unnoticed at that. This one has always baffled me because you have the episodes. They're finished. They're just sitting there. It's not like Invader Zim where you've got the dialogue and audio all made up, but you don't have the animation. Everything's done. Why sit on it? And speaking of Invader Zim, we have to talk about it because aside from Making Fiends, this is the most famous cancellation out of all of them. Or at least it was up until recently, but we'll save that for the end. And by the way, if you're wondering why I'm not talking about Making Fiends here, that's because, well, I already did. Yeah, check it out. It's an earlier video here on the channel, but I think it still holds up pretty well. Get ready, Zim fans, this one's gonna make you really angry. I understand why this one got screwed over. Now, I'm not saying that it wasn't screwed over. In fact, I just said it was. But I can at least understand the justification for this one. Invader Zim was extremely expensive to make. And if it's not getting the ratings, then what's the point? You can't keep it going. It's not a worthy investment. Say you're working at McDonald's for $8 an hour or so, and then you buy a Lamborghini. That's not really a wise investment. It may be a cool car, it may function well, but it's not financially viable. Then again, this is the network that makes billions of dollars a year off of one show alone, but still. What I will not justify, however, is the audience it was getting. Nickelodeon constantly complained that this show was getting more teens and adults watching than children. And yeah, it's a kids' network, but viewership is viewership, right? They were only getting more devoted. One of the other things that bothers me is that they had all the episodes recorded for the 2nd season, but only produced half of them. Now, I can understand if they want to lessen the episode count, like, say, give them only 12 episodes or something. But they clearly did not notify the creative team in advance. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had all these unfinished episodes floating around the internet. And yeah, I guess it's kinda cool to have the mystique of these unproduced episodes and thinking about what might have been, but at least for me, it's not worth it. So the primary reason I can understand, but all these other reasons, and especially the treatment it got later on, not so much. I might not be a fan of those DreamWorks Nicktoons, but even I gotta say that this is not okay. The only reason that the Penguins of Madagascar, Kung Fu Panda, Legends of Awesomeness, and Monsters vs. Aliens the series were cancelled is, get ready for this, Nickelodeon didn't want to pay DreamWorks any licensing fees. And that's it. They were too selfish and clearly didn't know how to share, so my money, mine! You shows, you die, money, mine. Once again, it's not like these things were high art or anything, but come on, really? You know, the more that I think about it, it seems like Nickelodeon is afraid of success. They don't do this to shows that have a little bit of a slip or are stagnating. They even do it to up-and-coming big hits. We've already covered My Life as a Teenage Robot, but there are still a couple others we need to bring up. El Tigre, man, that one could have been something special. And you know what? A lot of people seem to agree. Strong viewership and tons of awards. This could have been one of their next big hits. But for some reason, and that's a reason that to this day I'm still entirely unaware of, Nickelodeon canned it. One season, that's all it got. There were several instances of El Tigre episodes being aired for the very first time at midnight. When asked as to why the show got treated like this, The creators said it wasn't as popular as SpongeBob. Now that's pretty low, especially because this kind of treatment happened in the show's early days. So it's almost like Nickelodeon watched the first 5 episodes and said, this show isn't a mega hit. Well, I guess we'd better bury it then. SpongeBob forever! You also can't talk about fear of success without mentioning Avatar: The Last Airbender. I still cannot believe what Nickelodeon did to this show. Unlike, say, Teenage Robot or El Tigre, Avatar: The Last Airbender did not need time to grow. It was a big hit right off the bat, sometimes even rivaling or beating The Sponge. So what does Nickelodeon do when they see 2 shows battling it out for the #1 position, generating them millions of dollars and tons of respect all across the board? Naturally, they try to kill one of them. Let's see, amongst the many things that Nickelodeon did to The Last Airbender were sparse airing order, random schedule changes, virtually no reruns, airing the episodes in other nations first and selling them on DVD in America, then months later would air the episodes as planned, calling them a world premiere. You can tell just how uncommitted they were to this series with the Kids' Choice Awards. Year after year, SpongeBob kept winning favorite cartoon, and still does to this day. But there was one year where that all changed. There was one year where Avatar: The Last Airbender was voted favorite cartoon. And whenever SpongeBob wins, there's a celebrity that goes on stage, they present the award, and there's this grand fanfare. But with Last Airbender, there was a small blurb at the bottom of the screen, and that's it, they completely swept it under the rug. According to longtime fans who were on the forums at the time, people were confused. Was that it? Was that all that they were gonna get? Nickelodeon seemingly got afraid that something was gonna beat the Sponge, so they tried to hide it. They had to announce the award in some way anyway, so bam! Bullet point at the bottom of the screen that if you blink, you're gonna miss it. There are 2 more instances I want to bring up, and really? They're one and the same. Rugrats and The Fairly Odd Parents. Both were gigantic hits. Both had been around for a long time, and, as most people would agree, went on way too long, to the point where all the fun just got drained out of the show. There were new characters popping up every which way, and they just wouldn't let it die. Until ultimately, all the life was squeezed out of it, and then it disappears to little to no fanfare. And it seems like this could be what's happening to SpongeBob. Sure, it's going on strong, but you never know. Something could happen. There could be a massive controversy, some of the actors could leave, or God forbid die, people could lose interest. Basically, SpongeBob could be going the same way as Rugrats or Fairly Odd Parents. And you know what? It's not the only one that can. The Loud House was heralded as a miracle by people everywhere because somehow it was an instant hit, which means that Nickelodeon wanted to keep it around. And judging by the fact that they're already spinning the show off while the original is still running, I'm starting to think that we might be having another instance where history repeats itself. Now, to be fair, I stopped watching the show around mid-season 2. Not because I thought it got bad or anything, stopped typing. I went off to college, so I didn't have enough time to keep up with it. Plus, I didn't have a TV there, so that would make it kinda hard. I went more in-depth about this in my Loud House review I made last Christmas. But from what I'm hearing from some of the fans I'm talking to, the show is starting to lose some of the luster that made it special in the first place. But then again, I'm talking to other people who say it's still going strong, if not stronger, so I don't know what to make of it. The point I'm trying to make with this is that even when you're successful on Nickelodeon, you can't consider yourself safe. Any moment, you could either die, or you're milk drier than the Sahara Desert. One or the other. And this is all confirmed, too. This is not speculation. You know how we know that? Thanks to a man by the name of C.H. Greenblatt, creator of the series Harvey Beaks. Harvey Beaks seemed to be another one of those typical instances of, you're on for 2 seasons, and bam, you're gone. That's it. You weren't SpongeBob, so you're gonna go the way of Pig, Goat, Banana, Cricket, As Told by Ginger, and all these. But unlike all the other creators, Mr. Greenblatt spoke out. It got him in massive trouble, but he spoke out. He called Nickelodeon out on everything I brought up here. So it was confirmed. And even though they shook up their leadership team afterwards, they're still doing the exact same thing. Simply put, the reason that they're doing this is because SpongeBob is comfortable. SpongeBob is safe. SpongeBob is a proven success. Even when they go back to other previous successes like Avatar: The Last Airbender with giving that a spin-off show, they're still not able to fully commit. It's always SpongeBob. That's the property that makes sense to them. And really though, I know we give Nickelodeon all this flack for doing everything I mentioned here, but are they so different from every other media outlet out there today? Think about it with things like Warner Brothers or Disney. They don't care about making new things. They don't care about trying out new ideas. All they care about is shoving their old properties down your throats again with sequels and spin-offs and reboots and stage adaptations and TV shows and streaming shows and anything else you can think of. Sure, some of them are good, but it's still nothing new. They're clinging to what worked in the past and what has been proven to make money. That's exactly what Nickelodeon is doing right now. Making Camp Coral and the Casa Grandes cannot come from any other idea than, we need more money. There's no artistic merit behind it. They didn't suddenly have an idea. Nah, they wanted to follow the leader and milk the cow dry, not realizing that once they do that, there's no new cow to take its place. And that's because they keep slaughtering them too early. If I was advising a friend who was gonna pitch their show to Nickelodeon, honestly, my advice would be one word: don't. We've seen exactly what's happened in the past, basically since their beginning with how they treated Rugrats and Hey Arnold. Don't set yourself up for failure. You know exactly what's gonna happen. And if I were to advise Nickelodeon, try something new. SpongeBob won't be around forever, no matter how many times you keep renewing it. There's gonna come a day where the show can no longer be produced. Whether it be because people don't like it anymore, they don't like the direction you've taken it, something's gonna happen. And when that comes, you're clearly not prepared. I know you're clinging to SpongeBob right now because that's what makes sense to you. That's what feels comfortable. We all like comfort, don't we? That's why a lot of people are adverse to trying new things. But you know what? Trying new things is more often than not the better option. And especially with every single media outlet out there clinging to their old stuff like you are, why not stand out? Why not make yourself distinct? That way, you'll stand out amongst a sea of imitators. People will take notice. Trust me, it's going to work. Who am I kidding? They're never gonna learn. I'm telling you, the day SpongeBob dies is gonna be an ugly day for that network. Who knows when it's gonna come along? But when it does, I can guarantee that the executives are going to be kicking themselves, regretting all those actions that they took against the other shows. They're going to wish that the network did not fight against the very shows that were supposed to keep them afloat. Well, folks, thanks for watching the video. What'd you guys think of it? What do you think is the most egregious Nicktoons treatment story out there? Comment below and let me know because I'm always excited to hear what you guys have to say. Thank you all for watching, and guess what? Next week is the last episode of Versus the Network, and if you thought Nickelodeon was bad, this is 10 times worse. What could it possibly be? Stick around. It's gonna get weird in more ways than one. It's time for the big one, folks. Perhaps the most mistreated show in television history, Mike, Lou, and Og! Wait, no one really remembers that show, except me, I guess. Unless you didn't read the title, the subject might actually kind of surprise you. The most mistreated show that I could find is The Weird Al Show. Yes, that Weird Al. Weird Al Yankovic had a CBS Kids show that ran for one season and then was canceled for seemingly unknown reasons at the time. However, now that Al has spoken his story, we know exactly what happened. The Weird Al Show has a Shout Factory DVD release, and for all 13 episodes, they got Al and the two producers of the show to go on to the commentary tracks and talk about the giant roller coaster ride of despair and agony that the network put them on from beginning to end. Trust me, the DVD is worth it for these commentary tracks alone. This is how I got all the information for this video here, and I'm gonna compile all the most important parts that they described and explain them to you in chronological order, painting a picture of the story that Al and his producers went through, one of betrayal, misery, and complete insanity. Let's dive into Versus the Network 104, What happens when the network explicitly and directly targets you? Weird Al Yankovic was looking to pitch his new idea for a show, The Weird Al Show. He eventually landed on CBS and they said, "Oh, we'd love to have your show on CBS Kids, Al, because we like you and your ideas, but we're only taking educational programs right now, we're sorry." But that old Al was so smart and so slick, he thought of a lie and thought of it quick. He blurted out, "This is an educational show!" And then that turned out to be what made The Weird Al Show come to life, but also what resulted in its untimely demise. Al never really intended for his show to be educational, but now that it was, what's the worst that could happen? It's not like literally every single thing possible could go horribly wrong. It did. They got their setting together, they got their cast together, and they got their team of writers together, so everything was looking fine. Until the network started delivering their notes. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but it seems like in 1997, CBS Kids was being ran by Karens. Nothing was good enough for them, and every single thing had to fit in their narrow worldview. Despite the fact that they were running, a Saturday morning children's block, they thought that children were stupid and couldn't comprehend anything. The note that Al and his crew got the absolute most was, "Your lesson is too subtle. You can't only mention it 3 times in the episode, you need to mention it 20 times, 30 times, 65,746 times. The network believed that kids were so idiotic that if you didn't remind them of the lesson literally every single minute, they would forget, and then therefore, they wouldn't learn anything. Al, however, was constantly trying to reinforce the fact that no, kids are smarter than you give them credit for. If you touch on the lesson maybe 3-4 times, it'll be fine. They'll know what it's about. If anything, repeating the lesson over and over is only going to annoy them." Yeah, they didn't go for that, and even in the commentary tracks, you can hear the producers, and especially Al himself, constantly stop and go, "Oh, here's the lesson again. You can tell that we didn't want to put this in right here because everything just stops." And you know what? He's right. It does just stop. What happens in the show is that they're in the middle of a conflict or a conversation or something, and then everything else freezes while they talk about the lesson for about 20, 25, 30 seconds, and then they go a little bit further, and then they stop it all again, and then go a little further, stop it all again. They're not even stopping to talk about it from a new angle either. They're doing the same one over and over again. And even then, it's not a good angle. It always amounts to, make the right friends because the wrong friends will make you do bad things. Be a good friend because that's what's nice. Learn to be creative because creativity is good. You can all see where I'm going with this, right? But Al is an industry professional. He's not gonna let little things like that get him down. In fact, he had a special little way of getting a dig at the network every single time they were going to present a lesson. If you watch The Weird Al Show, you'll know that right after the theme song, we get a giant piece of paper with Billy West literally screaming the moral at you. The screaming is meant to represent the network and how obvious everything's supposed to be. And then the paper gets ripped in half as a sign of, "Hey, we hate this moral, we don't want to teach it, screw you." Not since the theme song to Pinky, Elmira, and the Brain have I seen such an amazing middle finger to the network, and this one was far more subtle. But it didn't stop at the lessons either. You know something? When you hire Weird Al, you know what you're gonna get? Something weird. The network didn't seem to understand that though, because they thought that Weird Al was gonna try to be like Pee Wee Herman. Yeah, I'm not kidding. They even billed the show to advertisers and the media as Weird Al's gonna make his own version of Pee Wee's Playhouse. Weird Al's gonna make a spiritual successor to Pee Wee's series. When in fact, no, that's not true. Basically, the network looked at the show and said, a weird guy in a strange set? This has to be Pee Wee Herman all over again. I mean, yeah, to be fair, they did hire the guy who designed Pee Wee's Playhouse to make Al's subterranean cave. But that doesn't mean the show's the same. That's like saying the Powerpuff Girls and Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends are the same show because they're both made by Craig McCracken. Actually, no, it's not even that. That's like saying the Total Drama series and Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends are the same show because they're both made in Flash. See how that logic doesn't really work out? Doesn't work out here either. If you watch the Weird Al Show, you would see that there is no comparison to Pee-wee minus some of the weird elements. And the fact that we're following around a central character, but to be fair, Pee-wee never owned any of that. That was just something that he did. But oh, we're not done. That was the warm-up act. They didn't like anything that Al or his writing team came up with, and I mean anything. They outright stated in the commentaries that 9 out of 10 times there would be a joke that had a big sticky note on it saying, no, don't do this is offensive, blah, blah, blah. Do you know how bad it got? They hired a UCLA doctor, who I will not say the name of here in case someone tries to go harass him, to intentionally get offended by the show's scripts. I'm not kidding. He was supposed to be in charge of their quote-unquote educational quota, but his real line of work turned out to be more in line with a prison snitch, going into the writing room and seeing what they were cooking up and then telling the network, and then the network would get all complaining. A big example of this is one of Weird Al's educational tapes that he shows to Bobby the Inquisitive Boy. There's a part that tells you, hey, don't fall asleep at the drinking fountain because you could drown. And they actually got offended by this, saying, do you want children to be afraid of drinking fountains? You're gonna scare them into thinking they're gonna drown when they get water. Yeah, this is the level we're on here. This isn't some Saturday Night Live skit or anything. This is something that actually happened to Weird Al. Though I must say, at least in this front, Al wasn't entirely blameless either. He tried to put in a lot of things that were not okay for a children's show, like puppets committing suicide on screen. Yeah, I can definitely see why that didn't make it past. But the network was all obsessed with quote-unquote imitatable behavior. So anything that a child could imitate themselves, they were automatically forbidden from putting in the show. So obviously you assume that means something like, don't put your finger in the electrical socket, or don't run with scissors. Well, yes, but it also includes things like, don't dip your arms in vats of melted chocolate. They had to fight to get this scene on the air with the argument that kids don't often have vats of melted chocolate. This whole quote-unquote imitatable behavior thing made no sense. Yeah, you can't have Al do things like run with scissors, but he can do things like smashing plates on someone's head or squirting people in the face with mustard. You can't have Al do things like punch people in the stomach, but you can have him shave off his own eyebrow? So I guess the no imitatable behavior rule was only enforced when the network felt like it. Funny. But you know what's not funny? When they try to mess with the main cast. The network loved characters like Val Brentwood, Gal Spy, and the Hooded Avenger, but for some reason the two that they took issue with were Bobby the Inquisitive Boy and Mrs. Fesenmeyer. I think the reason they didn't like Bobby is because Bobby was meant to make fun of the educational aspect of the show. Basically this annoying little kid who contributes nothing bursting in going,
but Al, I really want to know!
Bobby, I'll tell you later.
But I don't know why they didn't like Mrs. Fesenmeyer. Maybe it's because every time she came in there was some kind of home movie that was played, or I don't know. But this has got to be one of the worst things they did here. So, Al had an original choice for an actress to play Mrs. Fesenmeyer. He pitched her to the network and they said no because she had an accent, therefore sounded, their words, not mine, too ethnic. Yeah, that was a thing they actually said, and Al had no choice but to take it. That's why Mrs. Fesenmeyer is played by the person you see here. And as much as they liked Harvey, they never liked anything surrounding Harvey. Not because he was a real animal, no, nothing like that, but the network executives would constantly go up to the cast and crew saying, can't Harvey sing or dance or talk in some way? And they'd always have to remind them, no, Harvey is a hamster. Just a hamster. Nothing else. This is why Harvey constantly communicates in thought balloons, by the way. This was a compromise so that he couldn't talk, but he also couldn't be just a normal hamster. They also didn't like Harvey in the Fat Man cartoons, but mostly because they didn't like the Fat Man cartoons in general. And now these last 2 points are the worst things that happened in the production of the Weird Al show. Filming was the first one. Oh boy, this is bad. The network often forced them to film 2 episodes per day, meaning that they would go till like 4 or 5 in the morning filming these things, and then bam, they gotta get up and go to the next one. They also had to skirt around a lot of child labor laws, too. With kid characters like Bobby the Inquisitive Boy or Huey or anyone else depending on the episode, you can't have them work past a certain time. So you had to go and do their scenes right now. So picture this. You haven't gotten a good night's sleep in a week. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. You've just filmed an episode and now you have to film another one. And then the network goes up to you and says, hey, you know this part here in the script? You know, we haven't talked to you about that beforehand, but, you know, we just decided through the power of magic and fortune cookies, we don't like this part anymore. Can you change it? Yeah, that actually happened. Multiple times. Right in the middle of production, even in the middle of shooting, they would say, You know, we just decided we don't like this part anymore. Can you change it on the spot? Ooh, and make it educational too. Yeah, I bet that went over well with the sleep-deprived everybody. And it never, ever stopped. It kept going on and on because nothing was ever good enough for these guys. Nothing that anybody said, did, or offered could ever appease them. So maybe that's why the show never got any advertisements. Yes, after everything Al and his friends went through, after all the work, after all the sleepless nights, they got nothing. The closest they got to advertisements were these generic bumpers. During the time that CBS Kids was airing the Weird Al show, they had this tagline called, "Think CBS Kids." So all it was Al and sometimes holding Harvey going,
"Think CBS Kids! Think spatulas! Think hamsters! Think lederhosen!"
It's ironic that this was the network that had the tagline being, "Think," when they thought that kids couldn't do that in the first place. You know what makes this even worse? Let me read you the list of celebrity guest stars that they had on the Weird Al show. Hanson, Fred Willard, Gilbert Gottfried, Alex Trebek, Ian Whitcomb, Patton Oswalt, John Tesh, Ron Popeil, Tony Little, Clarence Clemens, Michael McKean, Dr. Demento, Jack Plotnick, Drew Carey, Emo Phillips, Terry Garr, Dick Clark, All for One, Downtown Julie Brown, Charles Fleischer, Bare Naked Ladies, Victoria Jackson, Radish, Taj Mowry, Dick Van Patten, Fabio, Macho Man Randy Savage, and the original voices of Fred and Wilma Flintstone. Dang, that is impressive. I mean, wow. This single season, 13 episode show had the likes of Fabio and Macho Man Randy Savage. Not to mention all those other guest stars. I mean, look at this list. And you know what the network did to promote it? Nothing. They didn't mention a single one of these guest stars. Not Hanson, not All for One, not Victoria Jackson, not Emo Phillips, although they hated Emo Phillips, so no wonder. You have this giant, super impressive list of celebrities, and you don't say a single word? Oh, well, who am I kidding? I'm the idiot here. Obviously, when I see a commercial that says, "Thanks CBS Kids," I know, oh, Gilbert Gottfried's in this episode. Awesome, yeah! This could have been what saved the show. This could have been what got people to watch. Hanson was a huge band at the time. You had a Flintstones reunion. Come on, something like this, please, say something. So Weird Al was not doing so well in viewership because nobody knew it was on, and after all the abusive treatment that the network put them through, they did nothing to help them. They didn't lift a single finger, they didn't tell anybody about the special guest stars, which means that, yes, it happened. That inevitable fate was knocking at the Weird Al show's door. Yep, the Weird Al show was cancelled after one season. The network didn't let it perform well, they didn't help in the slightest, they didn't even give it a chance. Although I can't help but view this as karmic justice because all of the shows on CBS Kids' lineup got cancelled. Everyone hated all of them except the Weird Al show, but even with the Weird Al show included, they got terrible viewership. So they decided to burn the whole thing down. Al and the crew had mixed feelings about this. Filming the show and writing for the show and really anything about making the show itself was unbelievably stressful and painful and anger-inducing. But there was still a part of them that was gonna miss it. They put so much care and love into this thing and it never got what it deserved. Even to the very end, it was treated as the network's whipping mule. To this day, Al says he's proud of the show and he likes it, but he wishes it could have been what it was always intended to be. And that's how I see it too. The Weird Al show is definitely a good show, but it could have been so much better if the network wasn't so, well, evil. To any of those show creators out there, be careful. If the network doesn't want to pick up your show, don't try to change it into something it's not. Don't let them do to you what they did to Weird Al Yankovic. Well, folks, thanks for watching the video, and thanks for watching Versus the Network. Which one did you learn the most from? Which show do you think was treated the worst? Comment below and let me know because I'm always excited to hear what you guys have to say. Thanks for watching and we'll continue with regular program next time.